Hey, we want to welcome you all again for another discussion of the church and politics. And as we get further along into this election season, Danny and I felt we really needed to tackle one of the big issues, and the issue of abortion. And how do we approach this issue as followers of Christ and as following the scriptures and stuff like that? So Danny, why don't you tell us what we got in store for us tonight?
Well, first of all, the goal of these church and politics live stream is to challenge the church to be the church. That's sort of our tagline for our ministry. And we've looked at these topics because we want people to think. And so as we get into these next few weeks, we're gonna do two or three on this topic of abortion. Tonight we're joined by Jenna Gyorfi, who I've had the privilege to get to know through our church, where her husband Sam serves as our pastor. And I've been a part of this church now for a little over a year, and it's just been a great experience for us. And Jenna is not only a pastor's wife, she's a licensed attorney and is currently the program director for a medium-sized foundation. And during her legal career, she's helped nonprofits, churches, and mental health professionals navigate all the regulatory stuff that they have to get through to do their missions. And Jenna's also worked with nonprofit organizations and individuals in Chicagoland area and also Central and Eastern Europe to keep them on task for what God's called them to do. She's also interested in works and with nonprofits to understand the next generation donor. That's a fact. We have to have another live stream to talk about the next generation donor thing, because I'm fascinated with that and what that means for giving and generosity and engagement with the nonprofit sector. It's a fascinating topic as well. Well, in addition to that, she's lived both in the United States and Europe. One of the ways that I bonded with her and Sam is that just like I spent a time in an international church, they did too in Switzerland back in the day. And so she's had experience and has worked with organizations here in the United States and in Central and Eastern Europe. She's a graduate of Wheaton College, earning her bachelor's degree in international relations, and is an alumna of the University of Denver Stern College of Law, where she served as vice president of the Christian Legal Society and worked in their mediation clinic. Jenna lives here in Tucson, Arizona, with her husband and two children, Berg, who's 5, and Lena, who is 3. And welcome, Jenna. Thank you for coming and being a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I first heard your views on this subject when you and Sam did your presentation in our church. We've had a series of Monday evening things at our church across this year called Engaging Conversations, where we've actually had open discussions in our church about hot topics this year. And they did one in our church on this topic of abortion. And Jenna joined Sam in leading that discussion. That's when I first heard that. And I was struck by the emphasis on what you called finding a third way to deal with this issue. One that looks both at the woman and the child needing compassion, empathy, and real help. So tell us about your journey with this issue and why it's so important to you.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks so much for having me. Danny, it's been a pleasure getting to know you and your wife, Ginger, and just, like I said, bonding over living abroad and all of that. And Rob, it's been great just to meet you briefly. And I love what you guys are doing. I told my husband he was crazy to do these engaging conversations, and yet here we are, and now I'm doing this. So I blame him for dragging me into this. But, first of all, I'd like to just say that I know this is such a sensitive topic for most people. And so I don't want to generalize too much, because I also know as Christians, there is a wide spectrum of what that falls into, and various denominations and things like that. So, and I myself have swung from one side of the pendulum all the way to the other, until I just threw out the pendulum and settled where I am today, because I just think it's ridiculous. But so for some context, I grew up in the evangelical Republican context of the 90s and early 2000s. So at least when it comes to this issue, it was pretty much understood that to be evangelical and Republican meant that you were pro-life. And that was strictly defined as anti-abortion, full stop. I also grew up in the height of purity culture. And so there was also a stigma that if anyone was thinking about having an abortion or needed an abortion or, had one, well, first of all, they clearly didn't have a purity ring. And second of all, that there was a large moral failing that had happened. So that was just kind of in the area in which I first kind of engaged this issue. And to match, I didn't really think a lot about it, because it was decided. It was like, did God create the world? Yes. If you're a Christian, should you be anti-abortion? Yes. And it was a settled issue. So for a large majority of my life, I didn't really think about it, until I have this very vivid memory of I was just post-college and I was about to enter law school and I was having a conversation with someone and these words fell out of my mouth and I said, I'm a single issue voter and that issue is abortion. And I was like, and I think back on that statement and I'm like, okay, I was in law school where I was learning like how to question things and be curious. And I had lived abroad at this point. And yet there was this one thing that I had just accepted without questioning it or doing any sort of deep dive in what it meant for me to engage in with this issue. And I look back and I'm also like, no issue. You can never be a single issue voter if you really examine it from so many angles. You realize there's so many other things that play into that. And so, it was in that context, I think that probably when those words came out of my mouth, the unraveling of what I had been coming into my education, I started to unravel. So I was in law school and I was studying Roe v. Wade, and my husband was a youth pastor at one of our local churches. And within the span of 2 years, we had 2 young women, 2 students have unintended pregnancies. And we were in our mid to late 20s. We were like, we can handle anything. Like, we've got the playbook, we know what to do. And turns out we were not competent at all to handle an issue so heavy like this one, and to counsel and to be with, these women, these young women and their families in this. So what I mean by competent, I felt like this position that I had just been seeped into me of your anti-abortion was just woefully inadequate of addressing the needs and the fears and the concerns of these 2 young women and their family. And so I just really began to wrestle with what that meant. I started to try to look at these standards and these judgments that purity culture had put on and demanded, and the no exceptions or very few exceptions that the pro-life camp had really demanded of you. And so as I began to, we walked alongside these young women, and as I knew their hearts and knew their families, I really couldn't sit with what I had really been taught. And to be fair, later in my life, I really flirted with the pro-choice party and camp as well, and I just felt so unsatisfied in both places. So that, I think that's really kind of where my journey really started. And it's an important topic to me because it really saddens me that this issue, that they've taken this thing that is so beautiful and so terrifying and sacred and attached such vitriol and hateful language. And, having had the privilege of being pregnant twice myself, I'm acutely aware of what is asked of women, what is asked of your mind and your soul and your body to carry and create another human. And the world has just taken this very sacred space, this interconnectedness of a woman and a child, and it just politicized it and dehumanized it.
Wow. I'd like you to expand on some of these things that as we proceed, but let's kind of go back a little bit. Right now, you're on the board of an organization called Pro Grace. So can you tell us a little bit about what Pro Grace is about and how you got involved with this ministry? Yeah.
So I'll start with how I got involved with the ministry, because it kind of flows a little bit of how what happened. So back when my husband and I were finding that we were woefully incompetent to handle all of this. And trying to figure out how to love and counsel these young women, we contacted so many pregnancy centers. We pulled so much Christian material trying to find something that felt sufficient to give to these women, to give to these families, and we just couldn't find anything. We couldn't put a finger on it at the time, but there wasn't anything that really felt like it was hitting both the woman and the child. On the pro-life side, it's all about the child. On the pro-choice side, it's all about the woman. So we found this Christian pregnancy center in Chicago, and on their website, there was some language, some words, some resources that just was starting to understand this interconnectedness, this whole picture of what it means when you're faced with an unintended pregnancy. And so we pulled everything we could, and we walked with these women through their stories. And later we were both listening to a podcast, and the podcast was featuring the executive director of this organization called Prog. And we're like, this sounds really familiar with what we dealt with a couple of years ago. And sure enough, it was the executive director of Prog had left the pregnancy center to start her own nonprofit, to address the issue of abortion in a non-political way. And then years later after that, I started working for this foundation that had been doing work with Prog for a number of years. And so got to know their work a little bit more intimately there. And then several years after that, the executive director asked me to join the board of Prog, which I happily agreed to, because I just think that their message is so desperately needed for churches. The church has just got to become a place where women and men and their families feel safe to talk about unintended pregnancies without, the fear of judgment and shame and all that. So, but yeah, so Prog, that's a little bit of the story leading up to that. But Prog is one of the goals is to form a community of people reshaping the Christian response to abortion to look more like Jesus and less like a political platform. So changing and transforming the way we think and we talk and we engage with this issue. We're trying to move the focus away from politics and back towards people. So they can do this in a couple ways. They do it through direct service organizations like pregnancy centers to help them transform some of the language and their approach and their demeanor and how they engage with women that are facing this issue and families. They also work with church networks or even individual churches to run this course called the Transform course, which is just a kind of like a church movement of, again, learning to rethink and how we talk and we engage with this issue. But ultimately, I think one of the things I love and I don't love about Prog is that, it really calls us into, the great way to put it is the third way, like Danny was saying, but I call it this messy middle. It's just, we're trying to operate in this messy middle because let's face it, we're all messy people, like our lives.
Right.
And so let's build a community of messy people that rises above the pro-life camp and the pro-choice camp and says, no, we are going to lead with grace. We're going to start with grace, and grace is messy, and that's okay.
Wow. When I spent a lot of time kind of scouring your website. By the way, just a commercial. On the website, they have available a free ebook, which I downloaded and read. And it's if you want to just get a sort of a survey of what they do and their approach and philosophy, that's a great way to do that. And that's available on their website. Is it progress.com or .org? Do you know?
.org, I believe.
Yeah, progress.org. So you can, and like I said, there's a free ebook. But one of the things that caught my attention there is the following phrase appears on the website. God set the church up to be a safe place to extend the grace and support needed to diffuse panic, isolation, and shame, replacing that belief with a new possibility of hope and belonging in the community. It goes on to say, but research also shows people believe any interaction with Christians will confirm and magnify these emotions, meaning the ones of shame and those kind of things, citing fear of judgment and no visible support as their main reasons for not approaching churches. And here's the stats that really hit me. At only 7% of women say that they would go to a church for help if they had an unwanted pregnancy. And then this is the really big one to me. 4 out of 10 women who get abortions are regular churchgoers. And of those regular churchgoers, only 16% of those regular attenders of church said they would go to their church for help. And so my question is, in light of this, a rather stark statistic, how do we see this issue less as an issue and more about people? What do we do to change that narrative?
I told you in the pre-show that statistic makes me cry like every time, and I promise these are not fake tears; they are real. It just saddens me. It saddens me that these women that that are facing such a time. I mean, both of my pregnancies were planned, and it was still frightening. It was so scary, and to know that there is not a safe space in the church. And again, I don't want to generalize. I'm sure there are churches that approach this subject in a healthy and grace forward way. But it's sad that even if those churches exist, that the majority of women don't feel comfortable being there. So, I'm not, my husband is the pastor, the theologian. I am not, but I was reading this book of ancient Christian wisdom the other day, and I just loved the way that this author put this, is that he was citing John 1:9 when John is referencing the divinity of Jesus. And he says, the true light that enlightens everyone was coming into the world. And the author really just invites us to look at the light of Jesus in one another. And I mean, it's the same thing with being created in the image of God. If we really believe that everyone is made in the image of God, that means that every person bears something of God, that if we just take the time and a little bit of curiosity, that person, whether they know it or not, can reveal something about God to us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I think the very, very first step of making this less of an issue and more about people is to stop making people issues to be dealt with, boxes to be put in, see people as reflecting the light of God. I think that's one of the huge detriments of the pro-life, pro-choice situation, is that as soon as you say anything, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-choice, you are put into this box with
right.
defined edges. And there's no gray, there's no messiness, there's no unique story that God has placed on each of us that we're allowed to bring. We're not allowed to bring that. And so I think the first step really is to stop seeing people as issues and to see them as people that reflect the light of God to us. And I think that is just a beautiful place to start.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's ask, what do you think are some things then that Christians don't understand, or that you wish that they knew, that would help us better approach this issue and better approach the women and the complexities of the issue?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, and one thing I will say is that, so in law school, I was part of this mediation clinic, and one of the techniques they taught us was that in most legal cases, you're just trying to divide the pie. Who's the winner and who's the loser? But in mediation, the goal is not about dividing the pie. It's not about winners and losers. The goal of mediation is to expand the pie. So to be creative, to be curious about the situation, explore everything, move away from the winners and the losers and the us versus them mentality. And I think that really applies to the abortion issue as well, is just moving away from this dualistic mindset. So at first, I think that kind of goes into is that I wish Christians would just be a little bit more curious and ask a few more questions. I think,
like what? Like what are some questions we might ask? And what do you mean by being curious?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if someone, I will say this, is that definitely based on that, the statistic that Danny read that's on the Progress website, is that I think that Christians, so most Christians, there's someone in every Christian's life that has probably had an abortion, or at the very least seriously considered one, and has gone those steps. And if any Christian says, well, I don't know anyone that has ever had an abortion, it's probably because that person is not a safe person to tell that.
Interesting. Yeah. Or they don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable expressing that because they don't know if you're safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be in your family, it could be a friend. I mean, it could be a coworker, it could be a fellow church member. Is that, especially based on that statistic, there's someone in your life that has probably had an abortion, and at the very least seriously considered one. And if you are not a safe person to go to, then you're not going to even have an opportunity to ask questions. So when you ask about what are questions that we could ask, it's I think one of the phrases we have in our household is, and it's very hard because my husband and I both believe that we are right 99.9% of the time. So in that 0.1% of the time that we might not be right, we ask the question, but what if I'm wrong? And I think that's just, if you don't know anyone that's willing to share their story with you, I think the first thing that Christians can ask is, especially those that are just staunchly in either side. So, right, it's not just the pro-life side, it's the pro-choice side. Ask the question, what if I'm wrong? Ask questions of yourself, ask questions of your side, ask questions of the other side. But don't ask the questions from a place of, I'm going to ask this question to prove them wrong. You have to start from a place of humility, a place of trying to understand, what could possibly be going through the mind of someone else when they have that position. And I think that's the very first question that any of us can ask is, what if I'm wrong? Because you're likely not going to just go up to some random woman on the street and be like, so have you had an abortion? Tell me about it. Like, that's not going to happen, right? It's a very sacred space. It's a very private space. It's a very humbling space to be invited into that, be invited into that conversation and that discussion. And I would hope and pray that if anyone is ever in that space where a woman has felt safe enough to share these things, that the next question would be, tell me more. How are you feeling? What are your fears? Is there anything that brings you joy about this situation? How can I support you? Who is supporting you right now? What support systems do you have in place? Where can I help fill the gaps? I mean, a lot of it's listening. I would say before you ask questions, it's listen, ask to just hear their story and empathize as much as you can with them. So I think that's a good place to start.
That's excellent. Let me answer one thing really quickly, Danny, and that is one of the things I think we might experience, and you probably experience this, Jenna, and with your organization, is the fact that, well, this is not a topic that we ask questions about because we already know the answer. I mean, the answer is that abortion's wrong. So why would I possibly ask the question, maybe I could be wrong, when I'm not, right? You face that kind of opposition. So, and how do we diffuse that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that's where the grace aspect comes into it. I mean, if you're like, well, I don't need to ask why I'm wrong because I'm right. Well, yeah. If you have a woman, your daughter, a niece, an aunt, a close friend, a coworker that has somehow come over this barrier of all the shame and the rhetoric and the language that has been attached to this issue and has had the opportunity and has been able to utter the words, either I'm going to have an abortion, I've had an abortion, or even just I'm pregnant. And it's not something that's like planned where everyone's like, oh, what's your gender reveal party? I think if your first instinct is, yeah, but I know I'm not wrong in this, so I don't even have to ask if I'm wrong. The examination needs to happen several steps backwards. Like we need to have that conversation with ourselves way before we even get to that place. Because I honestly don't believe that someone's going to come to you if that's the position that you have. Yeah. Because by the time someone is bringing you to that place, you are already in a place of grace. You're already in a place of empathy. You're already in a place that says, this person has honored me with their story, and I want to hear it.
All the things you've been saying reminds me also of your founders, Progress's founders. I'm sorry, I forgot her name right now.
Angie.
But, Angie. So Angie was in telling her own story. Mentioned that she had this sort of an epiphany. She was thinking about Psalm 139, which is a verse that gets used a lot in this discussion. You're fearfully wonder made. God knew me in the womb, this kind of thing. And it dawned on her, this fearfully and wonderful made statement applied both to the mother and to the baby. Yeah. We always apply it to the baby, which is, and understandably so, and rightfully so. Everybody says her epiphany was, that applies to the mom too. So one of the things you've been describing is all the the woman goes through.
Mhm.
And we have this debate. The politicization of the debate has shifted the focus to the baby. Now, I understand why, because they're both important.
Mhm.
But I think that was an interesting thing to read and to hear her share that particular part of her own story. That we tend to, even when we think about the scripture behind this, we tend to focus this debate on the baby and forget that there, like you said earlier, there's this incredibly God-created symbiotic relationship between the mother and the child, and both are important in this particular discussion. And that,
yeah, I mean, I think, she says this often, but like, God could have chosen any way to bring new life into this world, right? Like,
Right.
it could have just, it could have been storks, right? Like, it could have just been storks dropping babies.
Oh, it's not?
I know, shocker, I know. Don't in sex ed class, purity culture. We don't know if it's storks in the purity culture. So, but he could have chosen. God could have chosen any way to create life, and yet God chose this way. And in this way, God, I believe that he's honoring. Like, I think sometimes in this debate we forget that the woman is also a child of God, and we sit there, we're like, the baby's a child of God. How could you do this? And the woman saying over here, like, oh, I've been reduced to nothing. And to be honest, sometimes pregnancy and motherhood really feel like you are reduced to nothing. And and it really feels like all you are is just this vessel that is just you're just a machine that's been chosen to do this thing. And there's not that care and that language and that support that says, hey, it's really hard being pregnant. I honestly tell people all the time, I think this is probably the controversial thing, maybe not for you guys in your circles, but I think a lot of moms are lying when they say that pregnancy is easy and that it's wonderful. There are wonderful aspects of it, but it is hard. I read a statistic that it's like your body's running a marathon every day. That it's the energy that it's producing to create this life inside of you. And so when we've separated the woman from the child, we've said that one is not as important as the other. And in God's eyes, if both of them are important, they're both God's children, and they both are something that has been designed to work in this relationship together. And when we remove one of those from it, I think it just takes away God's design completely. And the really annoying thing about that is then again, it calls us into this messy middle where we can't just choose, I'm going to fight for the mom or I'm going to fight for the baby, because fighting for both can look really hard. You're saying, I'm not picking sides, I'm fighting for both sides. And that is a difficult place to sit in.
All right, let's talk about some practical things. So what are some practical things we can do to be engaged in this in a Christ-like way? What would some practical steps that all of us can take to address this in a Christ-like way that looks at both mother and child?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really as kind of we've mentioned, one of the things that's really annoying about this messy middle is that it doesn't give you the same maybe practical tools that the pro-life and pro-choice camps do, right? So pro-life, you can picket, and pro-choice, you can sign petitions to pass legislation to, keep abortions legal till X weeks, And so in this messy middle, the practical things are much more relational. And that's just hard because relationships are messy. But the first thing I would say is listen to stories. We all have a unique story that God has given and placed on each one of us. And while I know that unintended pregnancies affect men as well as women, they just affect women in a very unique way. And so I just encourage men to listen to stories from women about what it means to be pregnant. I think just even starting there and understanding that would move people to a place of, oh, I can kind of empathize and understand now, like what it is you go through. And it starts to create that posture of, of humility and safe space. Like I said, the struggle of losing yourself, of giving up your mind, body, and soul, the expense of childcare, the risk of losing a job. I mean, all of the things that goes through your mind with that. Like, just listen to story, invite those stories. Hey, could you tell me about this? Like, what were you feeling? What was it like for you? And then just really listen. Don't shrug them off. And it's like, oh well, that's Eve's curse for you, kind of thing. It's a true thing to sit and really listen, to someone's story. I think, again, like, continually asking yourself questions of, what if I'm wrong? Reading sides, reading things from your opposing, like the opposing parties from their website, not about what your side says about
right
them.
exactly
Read something from them, read stories about why people support one side or the other. I think that's just something that we can do just in our own homes when we're scrolling on our phone or internet. Is if we're really passionate about an issue, we should know an issue, through and through on both sides. As an attorney, we're trained to really ask questions, and we've kind of come, as I was studying law, Sam and I kind of came up with this kind of mindset in our house that, ask questions until you run out of questions. And it's not until you've run out of questions that you've started to finally understand the situation. And so it's ask those questions. And if you're saying, I'm right, I don't need to ask questions, well, I mean, Jesus asked a lot of questions. He has a lot of questions of a lot of people. And so, I mean, I don't think any of us are Jesus. So I think we need to keep asking questions. But from Pro Grace, like, I think one of the things that is so great about one of the practical things that they can do is, or what you could do that engage with Pro Grace is, of course, like Danny said, download the ebook, read a little bit more about what that means. But they also have a course called the Transform course that they run through churches, individual, network, even small groups. And there is a Transform leaders cohort that's starting on September 9th. It's about 4 weeks long, and I believe that you can just take it kind of at your leisure, but it gives you a little bit more information about what it means to live in this third way. And kind of like some of the, reading the feedback and the surveys that have come from this, I mean, people feel so much more confident to talk about the issue of abortion in a grace-filled way than they did before that conversation. We have a lot of sayings in my house, as I'm realizing this, but we also kind of say that, like, if there's something that you're either unwilling to talk about or have refused to enter into a deep conversation about, then there's a chance that you've made that thing an idol in your life, and you really need to examine it. And so I think that this course that Pro Grace offers is a good way that if you've made abortion you're a single issue voter on abortion, I would really encourage you to take this course and just really engage in a deep way with the issue that is probably different from the way that you've engaged with it before. And then they've got a lot of other resources on the website too.
Sure.
There's a podcast that the executive director, Angie, hosts that's just phenomenal, that you think, like, how many podcasts can you host about abortion? But they dig into deep things, like kind of like purity culture, the Barbie movie, and just the things that come from that. It's fascinating. So I would encourage you guys to, listen to that as well.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, it's so much easier just to sit back on my couch and tell everybody that they just shouldn't have abortions. Because what you're saying now, right, is that if I ask somebody, how can I help you? How can I support you? And they say, well, I'm almost under obligation to help them now, right? You know what I'm saying?
You're on the line.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what are some things that some of these women say, or some of the answers to that question? Because you said earlier, ask women, how can I support you? What are some of the things that they say to that churches need to be ready to help with?
Mm-hmm. I mean, as Danny read in one of the statistics, but it's common knowledge that one of the main concerns or fears that drive women to have abortions is financial. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the cost of childcare these days is astronomical. And so if you are a single woman and you have an unintended pregnancy and you're sitting there thinking, I have to find childcare at 6 weeks for my baby. I mean, and let me tell you, if I had to go back to practicing law after 6 weeks, I would have had a malpractice claim brought against me. But I was in Switzerland when I had my babies, so it was a little bit different in terms of healthcare over there. But that, that's a struggle, finding a safe place for your child to be in a safe environment to grow and to be affordable. Diapers, again, even it's stuff as like of losing yourself, of not having any time to remember that you and yourself are a child of God. And if we're going to sit there and say, well, then you shouldn't have done what you did to get pregnant in the first place. How many men that do this then go off and they get to live their life and
that's so true.
Keep their jobs and not have to deal with can I breastfeed at my job? Is that possible? Where's my pump room? How do I take away the stigma that if I get pregnant, I'm not going to get the same opportunities to travel and for promotion? And there's still a lot of stigma that if women take time off of work, that they don't get the same promotional opportunities that men do. And so, I mean, asking how can I support you? It's being a woman's advocate, whether that be with their can I go to your doctor's appointment with you? It is a beautiful thing when you see, that 20 weeks, you see your kid and you're like, I've grown a baby dinosaur in my body. And you want to share that with someone. And if a woman doesn't have someone to share that in their life, offer to go there and be able to ask, help ask questions that she might have, or to just be that sounding board, or whether it be, other extreme cases would be to help her find an attorney if her workplace is showing some sort of, discrimination against her for being pregnant, or I have to travel for work and I have this kid. What I do, step up and care for that kid. And I will take this child for 2 days or whatever it may be. Again, I think it is a reminder that every story is unique and all of us bring a unique set of circumstances and personalities and life to this issue, and not even an issue to pregnancy and unintended pregnancies. And we have to be willing to address the uniqueness that I think grace gives. I think grace allows us to be unique, and the world is trying to put us into boxes, and that's just I don't want to be a part of that anymore.
When you said that, I'm laughing a little bit because when you said the whole thing about workplaces is discriminating, I'm kind of an Olympics guy, and so I was watching they were interviewing Allison Felix a few minutes ago doing the track thing. She took on Nike over this issue. I mean, absolutely. She was the most decorated woman in track history, and Nike refused to guarantee their support, their sponsorship support for 3 athletes that were pregnant. And really? She took them on. And then she eventually left Nike and started her own company. But she had the resources and the profile to go forward from that. But it was just, if someone at that high a profile and that successful, a company like Nike can, with all their reasons, can say, we're not going to guarantee your salary, your sponsorship because you're pregnant. Just imagine all the way down the line for like the vulnerable women who don't have the resources, who are are able to advocate for that. It's something I think we don't think enough about and realize it's true.
Well, and even just this is the first Olympics that there's a family space for women that either just had babies or have had babies. Yeah, that is a mother's room for that. And you're like, it's 2024 and we are just at the Olympics. We are just having a place for that because it's something that's just not talked about. And like you said, Allison Felix has been an incredible champion for women in the workplace, pregnant women in the workplace. And the struggle, I had the opportunity to hear her speak at an event, and just to hear that it wasn't smooth sailing. It wasn't this it's Allison Felix, so of course we're going to do what she wants. I mean, she had to really fight for that. And just think about so many women, now you need to talk about, Black maternal health and the just discrepancies that are there. I think that's just a constant reminder that it's not as simple as I'm going to Rob, as you said, just don't have an abortion, period.
Right. Yeah. Solves problem. It's all good. We're all good. Okay, great. Next issue. Yeah. And that's the problem though, is that it's, I mean, the most grieving thing that we've discussed today, in all reality, and well, I guess there's a lot of grieving things that we've discussed, but one of them is that 7% of women say that they would go to a church for help.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, really? I mean, one of the questions that we discuss on our podcast is, how did this Christianity thing even get started, let alone survive? Because you're talking about a Jewish Messiah who was crucified by Rome, claiming to be the king of Israel. Yeah, I mean, the whole story doesn't make any sense, and no one's going to believe it, right? Yeah. Yet it survived because Christians were real people that cared for people, that when the Romans discarded their babies, which they were allowed to do, the Christians began taking them in and started orphanages. And the Christians started hospitals for everyone, where everyone got medical care. The Christians were doing these things. And now we've gone almost full cycle in the opposite direction, where now the church is no longer even a safe place to have these conversations. We're not saying that you have to compromise your theological or political or
moral,
convictions on abortions. We're simply saying that if you're saying that you think that woman has to have a child, then let's make it as best as possible so that she can still be successful and valued as a human being. And that might mean that 19-year-old girl might have to live, in one of the parishioners' homes for a couple of years while she goes to school, and you can help care for the baby. And it's more than just buying diapers. It's going, and I like what you said, Jenna. It's valuing the women as women. This has been really helpful for me. This has been so great. So thank you so much.
And I think as we go forward, go ahead, Jenna.
I was saying, I think one of the big things, and Brene Brown says this, and I say it incorrectly. Say what she said. Don't say what I said.
Okay, yeah.
Like guilt is I've done something wrong, and shame is there's something wrong with me. And so many women feel the shame of there's something wrong with me because I got pregnant. And that is, and so to start to understand that's where women start from when they have an unintended pregnancy. If that does not set forth within you a desire to tell them, no, like there's nothing wrong with you. Like there's nothing wrong with you. And to say that you were made in the image of God and you were a beloved child of God, that's where we start is where we should start for every conversation and every issue, and to expel that shame as much as possible. Like that practical aspect is, how do we expel shame from this issue? How do we expel shame from the topic of abortion? Because I think that is someplace that we as the church have really added to, and in some cases promoted and championed. And I think that is a very sad, exactly to go to your point, Rob, of we've come full circle and now we're sometimes in the business of shame rather than grace.
Yeah.
So true. Too many times. Too many times.
Were you going to add something else, Danny?
No, I just kind of taking it all in. I agree with this. It's important. I think as we go forward in some of the future ones, we're going to get more into the politics and some of that around there. But I think it's a great place to launch these discussions on abortion, just to remind ourselves on the dignity of the people involved, the humanity of it, to move away from issues to people as a foundation for any of the discussions we may have in the future on this subject. So I'm really appreciative for your point of view. I think it's so helpful to remind us.
Yeah, and Jenna, we have, Danny and I are two males, and and Vinny might come on as well, and we'll have three males. And next week we'll have Mako, who's phenomenally well educated, but it's another male. We may want to have you back on at the end of all this if you're willing to do it, just to help us wrestle with this. But let me throw something else out, and you can comment now, or you can say it, and that is, Mako will have the statistics, and you may know the statistics as well, but I think it's a significant number of women that have abortions already have a child. They're having an abortion because they don't feel like they can afford another one. It's an economic issue, and you alluded to this earlier, that if we can deal with the economic issues that are involved with this, we can actually eliminate or reduce the number of abortions. And the second thing about the economics is, of course, that it disproportionately adversely affects women of minorities and the poor. As soon as you make a law saying that Arkansas, you can't have an abortion. I'm just randomly picking a state, but it's probably right to say Arkansas, you can't have an abortion. I probably picked the good one, right? Then all of a sudden now the wealthier women either have doctors that they pay that will just keep it quiet,
or they travel,
or they can afford to travel to another state. Whereas the poor don't have such doctors and they can't afford to travel to other states there. So I think that this is a much more complex issue than we want to make it out to be. And it does mean that we need to be the church and be engaged in this. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that one of the things about educating ourselves around an issue like this and listening to stories and to people rather than just the little sound bites that we get is, one of the other things that, I hear a lot is, that women are using abortions as birth control.
Yeah.
And I have had several friends that have had miscarriages that go through a similar process, it's called DNC process. And it is not a process that is like getting a massage. It is, It's not a day at the spa. It is a painful thing. And so while I'm sure there are exceptions to every rule, I think what I want to highlight with that is not that there aren't people that are doing that. I'm sure there are, like I said, there's exception to every rule, but it's to remember that that these stories that you hear of oh, well, all these women are doing this or they're all doing that. And do you know any of them? Do you know someone that has done that? Because I guarantee you the woman that is in your life that you don't know about, that either has seriously considered an abortion or has had one, is not that and is not the exception. Again, they're not the extremes. They're the people that are in the middle that have another child. And I don't know the percentage, but I do know there's a percentage of women that are married that have abortions because exactly for the financial reasons. They are in a situation where they're and their husband are working 2 or 3 jobs and they have a kid or they've got 2 kids and they're like, birth control failed and we can't afford this. We can't afford to do this.
That's
and
real.
What you're saying to those people is oh, in some ways, not to be controversial, but in some ways what you're saying is, well, your husband should make more money so you can stay home and care for the kids.
Yeah, I get that. By the way, just as a point, the one point of empathy that Rob and I have in this is that we both are married to women who've had multiple miscarriages. So we have multiple for both of us. It's one of our unique bonding places and that. So we have walked through that side of DNCs and the recoveries and all of that stuff. So while we've at least had a measure of having of walking through a portion of what people can go through on this. By the way, here's my commercial, and I think I mentioned this to you before, Jenna. I am this huge nerdy fan of the show called The Midwife, and I've watched all 12 seasons, every episode, because I think it should be a required viewing of every pastor in the country.
Okay, very good.
I do, and one of the things is because they serve the poor in London, and they have dealt with these issues around pregnancy from every angle, and abortion and contraception and every possible angle you can think of that women go through, particularly the poor. They have in some way, shape, or form addressed not in a non-political, but in this is what it takes to help these people kind of way. And even the interplay between the secular nurses and the religious nurses over these issues and their different points of view. I don't know anything in popular culture that's, I think. So I'm a huge fan of that. So that's my little ad for that show. Maybe I'll do a whole podcast, Rob, on that show sometime.
You should do one of those where you narrate the show, each episode.
But that show has really helped me understand I knew in theory the issues about poverty and stuff like that. They have depicted it in ways that made me think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely.
Jenna, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And we'll put in the show notes or in the comments or whatever, some of the links to Prograce and the Transform course and the podcast and the Midwife show that Danny apparently brought up. And thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your efforts. And And anyone that can be the pastor's wife with Danny in your church deserves a special applause as well. So,
I do like to say that I am the spouse of a pastor, because I do not. This is a whole nother episode.
Is that right?
Yes.
Traditional pastor's wife. So
my wife
Right.
is the same way. I'm not a pastor's wife.
One of
They better not expect me to be.
Yeah, one of Jenner's great claims to fame is that we've been married for almost 50 years, and she's never been responsible for me being fired. That was one of her goals. Because she was sure when we first launched in, she was sure that someday she probably would do that. But no.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Not a traditional pastor's wife either.
Yes, my husband has had an evaluation on his job, and there was a comment about me on there, and I was like, "What? How is this?"
Yeah, don't read those comments. That'd be the first thing I would say is
anyway.
don't read those comments, and I would tell him don't let you read those comments. Yeah.
Yeah. Any final comments from you, Jenna? Anything you want to close? Any closing ideas or words? Or
honestly, the only thing is, I would just really encourage, and I say this coming from a place of, I'm trying to do this myself. It is so hard to just continually come from a place of intellectual humility, a place of grace, a place of not I'm right all the time. And I really want to encourage people to remember too that there's just a wide swath of Christians out there, and we're not all in this one little category, and that's okay. Like that's okay to have. This is I'm not the theologian, but for my knowledge, this is not a salvific issue. So like it's okay to disagree, to talk, to converse, and to understand people's perspectives in this. And so I just encourage people to continue to dive into this topic and these stories of people as they navigate this really sacred space, and reclaim it for God and for grace, and not in a dehumanizing way, and say, no, we refuse to do that. We refuse to label people and put them in a box and say you're this or you're that, and you're good or you're bad, you're sinful or you're not. And I think I would just encourage people to do that.
Amen.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us as well today. If you have not subscribed to the Determined Truth YouTube page, please do so. You'll be updated automatically for upcoming live streams. Next Monday is Mako Nagasawa as we continue the discussion of abortion and the church. And we have other live streams coming up on Israel, Gaza. Thursday night of this week, all of this will be on the YouTube channel. I'll be doing some more discussions of Jesus and the kingdom and the poor and what all that means. And Jenna, thank you so much for being with us. Yes. And I put my email addresses down there. Don't spam me with stuff. But if you have any questions that you didn't raise, if you're watching this later on or whatever, you have some questions, please feel free to email me that question. We'll do our best to answer that in future live streams. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Danny.
All right.
All right.